I went home and I just slapped my kids in the back of the head going, this girl started a company with a robot and you guys played Fortnite for like 2 years while you're in COVID. What the heck? And one of my sons has a mechatronic engineering degree. I'm going, look what she did with her degree. Like, bang. Now I'm going to go back to them and go, now she's worth $100 million. Double bang.
Hello and welcome to Pulse, your podcast delving into all things health, innovation, digital and data. Proudly brought to you by Pulse IT News. I'm your host, Louise Shaper.
And I'm your other host, George Margellis.
George, how's it feel to be back home?
Look, it's been a rough week getting used to not sitting on the beach or during the day whilst working on my Pulse podcast. My tan is starting to fade. I've had lots of catching up to do, so it's been good.
But isn't it crazy weather we have? Like, I just was in WA, spring, you expect like 25 degrees. It was 12 degrees most days I was there. Like, this Australia it gets a bit slow to summer.
Sydney's been the same. We had 1 or 2 really good days when we got here, and then we had torrential downpours. We had the wettest September day in 100 years or something. So the light rail got flooded, roads were closed.
Oh, really?
And now we're back to sunshine, so...
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. You're settling in and, there were no dramas in the house. The cat was still alive.
Yeah, the cat was still alive. Took her a while to get used to us again, but she's good. Kids didn't sell the house or change the locks while we were away, which is a good thing.
Oh, that's good.
What have you been up to?
I've been hanging out with my mum.
Oh, lovely.
So I found like a 10-day gap where I didn't physically have to be on stage somewhere else. And so my mum got to see this insane, stupid hours I do sitting at a laptop. She's like, are you still working? And I'm like, yes, I am still working, Mum. But it was nice to hang out with her. And my nephews live quite close by, like 30 minutes away, small country town. And they're sport crazy. And so I was there for I think it was 9 days. And I saw a football game, grand final that they were in. I saw a hockey preliminary final that they were in. And then there was a sports carnival day, which I managed not to go to. And they were really disappointed. Why can't you go? And I'm like, I actually have a job. I have work to do. But the other stuff on the weekend, I'll be there for that. So that was fun because, I don't often get to spend time with kids. And my nephews are superstars actually on the sports field. So it's good to see them play.
I'm glad you had a good time.
Yeah, no, it's good. And Mum's doing all right, so that's good.
Good to hear.
Yeah. George, before we go into our hot topics, we need to let people know that you and I are about to embark on a bit of an experiment with PulsePod. So what we are going to try is we want to come into your ears on a weekly basis instead of fortnightly. And so what we're going to do is this will be the last episode with the current format where we've got, the hot topics, then we have an amazing guest, and then we wrap up the show. So we're going to split the show into 2 episodes now. So there'll be 1 episode that'll be the hot topics and chatting about what George and I have been up to. And then the next episode, the next week, will be the guest interview. So we're splitting them up and we really want to get your feedback and see what you think about the new format.
Yeah, look forward to hearing what people think. Innovation requires us to experiment, and hearing us once a week rather than once a fortnight must make everyone's lives better overall.
Bonus. Yeah, that's right. Yes, but today is going to be the normal format. So we're bringing you part 2 of our wonderful chat with the amazing Dr. Eric Topol. So we look forward to bringing that to you soon.
I had a lot of people comment to me about the first part of the interview and the great content. And like I said, I've been a big Eric Topol fan for many years. I've actually started listening to a lot of the back issues of his Ground Truths podcast. Highly recommended to people. It covers a broad range of topics. And interestingly, this week there's a review of a book called The Big One, which is all about the next pandemic. So it really is broad and interesting. So I'm not sure whether we're supposed to be recommending other podcasts for people to listen to, but after you listen to ours, highly recommend you listen to Ground Truths as well.
Okay, yeah, we'll put a link to the show notes. And George, let's start our hot topics then.
Let's go.
Well, it's interesting that you just mentioned The Big One, that book about new pandemics, because our first story is related. Now, firstly, though, are you an ACDC fan, George?
I have been known to jump up and down to Highway to Hell in the past. Not a huge fan, but it's been background music for most of my life.
Yes. Well, I'm a country girl, so I didn't have a choice, but ACDC is like in my blood. And there's a reason that we're talking about ACDC, but this is about a different type of ACDC, which is going to start meaning something new in Australia. as reported in Pulse IT, Australia is finally moving ahead with establishing a Centre for Disease Control. That's right, the Australian CDC, ACDC. A step that has been promised for years, but it's always been pushed to the back burner. And of course, look, it did get some traction during the pandemic. And the CDC will be more than just about infectious disease response. It's being pitched as a hub for public health intelligence with strong emphasis on data collection and sharing across jurisdictions. The government has just announced legislation to enable the ACDC, which will be an independent statutory agency led by a Director General, and it's going to be operational from New Year's Day next year, 2026. So this raises a familiar question for us. Will Australia actually invest in the infrastructure and governance needed to make public health data timely, transparent and useful? Or do we risk getting stuck in intergovernmental wrangling, patchwork systems? George, Australia does have a lot of ground to make up in this regard. Are you confident we can do it?
It is interesting that Australia is setting up our CDC just at the same time as the Americans seem to be pulling theirs apart. So it may well be an opportunity for a bunch of people from the American CDC to come over to Australia and help us develop our own CDC. The CDC in the USA has been a critical component of public health globally for as long as I can remember. I remember as a medical student back in the 80s, referring back to CDC documents. And any TV show you see where something's happening, they always refer back to the CDC and their headquarters in Atlanta. So I think it's really important that the concept of a CDC remains as a global context, and Australia needs to play a part of that. So the pandemic showed us the local shortcoming. We didn't have a CDC. We were fortunate that Australia had the geographical isolation and our experience of COVID wasn't as bad as many other countries. But the fact that there was so much misinformation and wrangling about data happening here in Australia, something like the CDC would have played a critical role. The CDC is part of a larger global initiative, and WHO sort of runs that. And we've had Elaine Lebric on our show talking about how important that global data is and how the work of the CDCs from around the world fit in. So I think it's really important that we have a CDC. I'm glad that they've finally gotten us through. The data fragmentation in Australia will be a challenge that it faces along with everyone else, but maybe it will have that capacity to solve some of those issues. I mean, I was on a couple of calls recently looking at the new Health Connect in Australia, and we're moving away from that data fragmentation that we've had at a theoretical level at least. So hopefully this will be an opportunity to do that. I think it's a really exciting initiative as long as it remains a scientific data policy leading activity and it doesn't become politicized. And we've seen what's happening in the United States with the politicization of healthcare. Hopefully that's something we can avoid here in Australia.
Yeah. And if there are people involved in setting up the ACDC listening to the pod, you really need to go talk to people like Tina Pernat as well, because I loved what Tina had to say to us when she was on the show. She specializes in communication around epidemiology and others, and that science of like the mistrust and misinformation, disinformation. And she's got some really interesting, not just ideas, but things that have worked in practice about how you go about communicating data and what's happening with the data to everyday people to try and avoid falling into those traps that certainly America, unfortunately, is just going down in a big way.
It wasn't until the pandemic that we actually had an epidemiologist on Australian TV. I mean, I don't remember the last 60 years of my life, an epidemiologist being on TV every night talking to us. So yes, the CDC is going to have a very important role in capturing data, but it also needs to make sure it shares that data across the broad spectrum. So yes, clinicians need access to it. Drug companies need access to it. Pathology labs need access to it. But the Australian population also needs to understand what's happening, because at the end of the day, the COVID pandemic was relatively low key compared to the potential of other pandemics. So we have to think about what can happen.
Or even the measles, like that's incredibly contagious. No, you're right. And, this has really interesting impacts for public health, but also to how that translates to individual health and the implication for us as citizens and us as clinicians as well. So, what do we do with it? How do we capture that data? Yeah, like what Peter O'Halloran, when he was on the show talking about the health information exchange, there's going to have to be a real focus on the infrastructure that's required. Australia already has a lot of this in place, thanks to all the amazing stuff that's been done by the digital health community, supported by government for many decades now. So we have a lot of this stuff in place, but yeah, we need the policy conditions so that data can actually be appropriately captured, move around the system. And of course, in things like the ACDC, you need reporting in real time. Really, it can't be, there's a 7-day delay on well, there you go. A few hundred more thousand people were potentially killed because of our 7-day delay, So it's going to have to change things.
And we have talked often about the secondary use of data. And so the opportunity to use data that's captured in things like My Health Record and the various other clinical systems we have in place. Obviously, the issues around privacy and security are important, and we need to make sure we keep an eye on those. But again, I think there's opportunity here. And any of our US friends over from the CDC who want to give us a hand and give us some advice, we're more than willing to listen to what's happening over there.
That's right. Yes. You might be able to seek refuge over here because we need more talent. Well, our next story, George, I'm going to file this one under the theme of we are living in the future. Here's one of those stories that feels straight out of science fiction. An AI tool called SpermSearchAI. Yes, you heard that right, people. SpermSearchAI. It was developed in Australia by NeoGenix Biosciences, and it's just delivered its first pregnancy in the UAE. The system helps embryologists identify healthy sperm more quickly and accurately, cutting down time in the lab and improving chances for couples who are going through IVF. Now, I understand it's not the first pregnancy resulting from sperm search. Their first live birth was actually in Australia earlier this year. But this story is a really great reminder of how global digital health really is, and also Australian innovation making headlines in the Middle East. And, what that says about our ability for a pretty small country, really, to punch above our weight and scale and export our innovation here. And of course, I have to make a pun. So what a fantastic use case for AI, which is spotting the swimmers. What do you think about this one, George?
I think it's fantastic to see Australian innovation taking off. And the UAE in the Middle East is an amazing market at the moment. I mean, there's so much happening over there. I went to Arab Health a couple of years ago and it was just huge, and the amount of activity and the amount of money over there. And I have to take my hat off to the Austrade people who are really supporting local Australian companies to play a role, because, I mean, Arab Health literally had 2,500 exhibitors, and there was an Australian booth, and it had pretty high profile, and they did quite a lot of activity to promote it. So, from the business perspective, I think it's really important that we take advantage of those sort of markets. I mean, Middle East can feed into Europe, can feed into Africa. Africa's a continent that really has been underutilized as far as potential market capacity goes. So, from a business perspective, fantastic. From a science perspective, this is fantastic use of AI. I mean, though, technically, when you dig under it, this is pure machine learning type stuff. This is really the core stuff that's been done for a while, analyzing the swimmers and working out which one's the best. And having had some friends who have gone through IVF and realizing that it is quite a harrowing journey for them, anything that can improve the outcomes, can get them to where they want to go faster, I think is a positive. However, just by coincidence, last week we were watching Gallagher on TV.
Oh, God.
Just happened to be on at 11 o'clock at night, and Marina hadn't seen it, so we decided to sit down and watch it. And that gives you a whole new perspective around this idea of how we select sexes and select the ultimate fetuses. So as long as this technology is used for what it's good at, which is people with fertility issues who need the support, and doesn't become the de facto way of selecting the next breed of babies. Because if you look at evolution requires us to have that diversity. And if we just stick to picking the best sperm for everybody, that may be an issue. But from perspective of business, I think it's fantastic. From the perspective of Australian innovation, it's fantastic. From perspective of scientifically helping people who need it, it's fantastic. But yeah, just keep in mind, Gallagher and the Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, we need to make sure we use this technology for good.
Yes, definitely. And there's also a potential scaling issue here, which is a good thing, because my understanding is that what currently happens for male infertility, I guess, as a specimen, and it ends up on a slide, and a human actually has to look through a microscope and count how many, like, I can't believe a human has to do that. Like, what a time intensive job, and you're not going to be as accurate. Whereas now the AI looks at that specimen and goes, yep, okay, this is the situation, and can do that counting way faster, like multitudes faster than a human. So if that happens, then that you're significantly going to cut down the costs, hopefully have a higher degree of success as well, because you'll be able to identify those healthy sperm and how many are there. And then that'll widen access to fertility treatment, hopefully.
There is also some technology which looks at the quality of the actual fertilized embryos as well. There's quite a bit of use of machine learning in this space. And again, it comes down to having a big enough pool of data to be able to work out what's going to work and what's not. So, I mean, I watch it with great interest.
Yes, congratulations, everyone involved. Great story. I'm sure we will hear a lot more about them.
I understand the Australian Medical Angels were involved in that as well. So as supporters came out of University of New South Wales, which is just down the road from me as well. So I think it's, again, a great example of multiple groups working together to produce success.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move over to the US now. So, so much bad news coming out of the US. I'm looking for the positives here. So I did find one. The Department of Health and Human Services has announced it's finally going to enforce information blocking regulations. For years, patients were promised the right to access their own health data under the 21st Century Cures Act, but enforcement has been weak. Well, it is going to be enforced now. So providers and IT vendors who drag their feet on this, they can face penalties. For those of you who aren't across it, information blocking at its core is really about whether patients can get access to their own health records without running into delays, fees, or excuses. And only in healthcare, of course, do you need laws to force people to give patients their own information. I wouldn't like to see what would happen if my bank said to me, sorry, Louise, you can't have access to your balance right now. It might confuse you. Now, penalties, which so far have not been enforced, are significant. And the Office of Inspector General may impose penalties of up to $1 million per violation. And those violations can be against health IT developers, against entities offering those certified health IT products, health information exchanges, and health information networks. George, it's a theme we discuss a lot on Pulse, data access as a fundamental part of care, not an optional extra. Do you think we will ever see a similar policy environment here in Australia?
Well, first of all, I have to say it's good to see the USA actually enforcing good health policy for once, in light of some of the other health policies they've been promoting over recently. And point out now, this was a key part of the 21st Century Cures Act, which was an initiative of the Obama administration back in the 2010s. So it's been on the books for a while, and it's really good concept. I mean, we've had a number of people on our podcast talking about the value of patients sharing data. So the fact that they've had to now move from the carrot to the stick suggests that there's obviously something in the way, and whether that's commercial interests, whether that's just the egos of clinicians who think we know everything and don't want to share. But I think the fact that $1 million fine, I think we have to keep an eye on it here in Australia, because again, we've got our new share by default legislation, which, whilst currently limited only to diagnostic tests, has that capacity to make sharing of information better. We do have My Health Record as a tool to do that. So that gives us an advantage, whereas in the US, they're very reliant on the individual software providers and the individual care providers to provide the tools for the sharing. But at the end of the day, we have to take into account that that data, which was generated by people, belongs to those people. They, at the very least, have a right to have access to that information, and we have a responsibility to make it available. Now, at the same time, we need to make sure that that information is shared in a way that it's useful. So it's no use just giving people raw data. Here are the last 25 HbA1cs for you as a CSV file. So I think one of the important things we also need to work on is tools for turning that data from data into wisdom. We talked about that journey from data to information to wisdom, how you use that information. And health literacy is going to play a very important part of that. So we need to make sure we have tools in place which enable people to utilize that data to improve health outcomes and continue the research in how we do that in a more effective way.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know whether I guess we will need further legislation in time, but because we've got Sparked, this program where industry vendors have signed up, clinicians have signed up, like everyone's signed up to Spark to actually create those standards that enables information to share around the system, including with the patient. So hopefully we don't need to have the big stick like they do in the US for that to happen. Although we're not there yet, of course, there's still a lot of hiding information, but the industry are working really hard and diligently on progressing that so that it is much easier.
Whilst my health record's taken a long time to get to where it is at the moment, the reality is that the central concept of that was a tool to enable us to share clinical information with people. And it was originally called the Personally Controlled Electronic Health Record. The idea back in 2010 was for a record that people could have access to their information with. Once we give them that information, they also have a responsibility to use it effectively. And I think we need to really build on that. Things like Health Direct, which provide us with a tool for accessing various levels of healthcare with that information, may be a positive. I don't know. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I think the idea that that information belongs to the clinicians is very, very 20th century. I think we need to move on to our own version of the 21st Century Care Act.
Yes, we do. I mean, we certainly need to overhaul the privacy legislation. I think there's something like, I heard over 30, but someone else told me there's 80, but I'm like, I don't know about that. But there's at least over 30 different bits of legislation involved at data storage, capture and management in Australia. That makes it really unworkable if you're a health service that wants to share data, which, I can understand why lawyers are hesitant to just say, yeah, let it out and free. My brother-in-law, George, the other day was complaining about his wife wants him to go back to the doctor. And he's like, I'm not going back until I get my results. And so I was like, oh, there's this thing called the My Health Record. Let me tell you all about it. And no one had mentioned that to him, even though he'd had an argument with his GP clinic. And the result of the argument was that they will print and post in the mail his blood test results. And then he said he'll make a follow-up appointment. I was like, you can fast track all of that now. News to him. No one had told him about that at the clinic.
Hey, there's an app for that now. And I have to admit that my health app is really good. I mean, I think I commented on that last time. I got to see my pathology results whilst I was overseas. And on the My Health app, they came up in a very usable format. So the tools are there. But I still don't understand that when I get referred by my GP to a specialist, why that letter isn't also on my health record, because the fact they print out the letter, they put it in an envelope, they give it to me, and I carry it halfway across the city and hand it to the receptionist, who then scans it into their record, is bizarre.
Yes, well, we're still got a ways to go, don't we? But progress is being made. So anyway, good on you, US. And I hope people do get fined, because I think in a capitalist system, unless you start getting out the stick and it costs people where it hurts, this will continue. All right. Well, we're going to stay sort of in the US. This is a global story, but it is a US company. So we're over to Apple. Apple made its annual splash last week, and the health updates from them were front and center. The new Apple Watch Series 11 includes a blood pressure sensor, which is a really big deal given how many people have undiagnosed hypertension. And the new AirPods 3, they're going to track your heart rate. Yes, your headphones will now know how fast your heart is beating at the gym or whenever you record a workout. The tech is pretty interesting. The tech uses a photoplethysmography. Is that right, George?
Sounds about right.
Anyway, it's a really cool sensor that shines infrared light into your ears at 256 times per second to detect how much light is absorbed by your blood and how much is reflected back. The blood pressure sensor in the watch, now that has been approved in the US by the FDA, and I assume, just like the hearing thing with the AirPods before, that other countries will follow with regulation approval. Now, the AirPods heart rate sensor isn't an approved medical device. That's more just for wellness and individual use. Now, this is classic Apple play. They've been on about healthcare for a really long time now, really about normalizing health monitoring and embedding it in everyday devices. But it also speaks to this ongoing trend, which is blurring that line between what's a lifestyle gadget and what's a medical device. And George, I think I know the answer to this question, but, is this going to tempt you to make the switch over to Apple?
I have to give a plug to my Samsung Watch 7 that I bought, which also has a blood pressure sensor. And although it is rather fiddly, so you have to calibrate it against a normal sphygmomanometer. And to be honest, I still don't quite understand how it would work because I'm used to blood pressure monitors, which crush your arm behind the thing. But look, I think first of all, it's amazing that Apple's up to Series 11 of the watch. I mean, I remember when it was first launched, it was such a big deal. But then again, I remember when Steve Jobs launched the Apple II and the Macintosh. So, following that trend over the years, it's been amazing watching where Apple was and where Apple is. And whilst Apple Health is famously secretive about what it does until they release it, they did release a white paper last year about some of their health stuff, which was really quite fascinating. There's amazing the amount of work that gets done there. That blurred line between wellness tools and medical devices and the associated liability. I mean, I think often the issue here isn't the fact that they can't develop amazing medical tools, is that when you're a company worth a couple of $1 trillion, liability becomes quite a challenge because people in America like to sue big companies for trivial things. Undiagnosed hypertension is a big issue. The question I'm concerned about is it as big an issue in those people who can afford a $2,000 Apple Watch iPhone 17 combination as it is amongst those who can't? And how do we ensure we have equitable care here? Now, having said that, watches are the premium tools, but I've seen smart watches on sale for $29.95. So the technology is coming down the ranks. It's providing access to people who probably never would have had access to it before. My big bugbear, of course, always about these watches is you have to charge them every day or two, which is a pain in the backside. But that's the limitations of the current technology. I think it's an interesting play how we use this information to improve general health. I mean, we heard that RFK Jr. suggested that every American should be wearing a wearable. We still don't really understand what that'll do to the medical system, but I think we also need to do some more research in it. But I'll stick to my Samsung watch at the moment. And it is good that there is competition. So, they are pushing each other down the track. And there are a whole bunch of other ones. Google bought Fitbit and we've got Garmin. There's a whole bunch of devices out there. Lots of data. How clinicians are going to use it, I'm still not sure. I mean, there was a discussion years ago that all this data would get sent to your GP, and your GP sort of went, no, we don't.
No thanks.
Thank you, but no thank you.
And fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to be bombarded. I would like to see in the future data that I'm collecting about myself that is clinically valuable. Actually, it's curated where it's like a hands-off approach. I don't need to think about it. Neither does my GP, but alerts could be sent. So I believe that's the idea behind this sensor in the watch. It's not there to do a reading, but it'll look at trends over time and know, well, what's regular for you, and then be able to alert you when it's picking up a trend that's maybe not so good and you should go talk to your doctor.
If it becomes part of your preventative health strategy, and we keep on talking about this shift from treating people only when you're sick to preventing disease, then I think these sort of tools will play a role. But again, health literacy also plays a huge role here. So knowing what this data means and what to do about it is still very important. And that relates not just to the consumers, but to the clinicians as well.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I know you're going to love this next story, George. At the Aging Research and Drug Discovery Conference, which is held in Denmark, pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly made headlines by announcing they're making some of their large language models for drug discovery publicly available for free. It's called Lilly TuneLab. So basically, one of the biggest pharma companies in the world is essentially giving away tools that could accelerate early stage research. Now, it's a bold move, sort of part open science, part clever PR. On the one hand, this could really turbocharge academic labs and smaller biotechs. On the other, it's a smart play because it reinforces Lilly's dominance, as not only do they still hold the data, the pipelines, and the money to scale discoveries. The only catch here is that the data generated from other companies need to feed back to Eli Lilly to improve its models. So, George, is this a gift to science as well as a way to look generous while keeping the keys to the kingdom squarely in your own castle?
First of all, I have to say that I'm a big data nerd, and I can demonstrate that by the fact that I actually watched part of the ARDD conference whilst I was in Greece on holidays. And I actually did watch part of it whilst I was sitting on the beach because it was actually broadcast during the day in Europe. The conference was made available by live streaming for like $49, which is amazingly reasonable. And it had, I think, 3 Nobel laureates presenting at it and a whole bunch of really interesting content. It was a really deep and scientific conference. I think one thing it demonstrates is that we can share those sort of conferences outside the normal conference domain. Not many of us get a chance to fly over to Denmark and sit in a conference with 3 Nobel laureates and some of the most amazing medical technology companies in the world. So I'll give them a plug for the fact that what they did was an amazing thing, and they shared that information. Like I said, I think I paid $49 US. It was 5 days of conference. There was some really interesting discussions. My wife got really upset with me a couple of times as, I was sitting there. She thought I was listening to music and I was listening to this. I think it's interesting that for starters, big pharma companies are now thinking about sharing data. That's not something we normally associate with big pharma. We tend to think about them as being very controlling. And whilst on the outset, it looks like a great initiative, it's the same way we applauded DeepMind a few years back when they shared the AlphaFold data. I think we have to always keep in mind that saying where we have in technology that, if the product is free, then you actually are the product. And I think that comes into play here. Eli Lilly will take advantage of what they can learn from this tool. But at the same time, a drug discovery LLM costs millions of dollars to generate. So the fact that they're sharing it provides access to that information to companies or innovators who probably would never have access to that information. So I guess it's a bit of a give and take. I think if it speeds up drug discovery, if it improves therapeutics, it's a good thing. Sure, Eli Lilly is a commercial organization, as are all the big pharma companies. And, we've complained about some of the ethics of what they do. But at the end of the day, if we didn't have those companies, many of the drugs that we currently use that save our lives wouldn't be available. So there's a lot happening about it. Is it a marketing thing? Is it a science thing? Only time will tell. It'll be interesting to see whether the other drug companies come to the play, whether we can work out some more collaborative way of doing drug research, because, I was reading recently that there hasn't been a new pain drug in the market for 20 years. There hasn't been a new antibiotic for many years. I mean, there's a need for these drugs to come to the market, but they do cost hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to produce. So there's a commercial imperative around making it viable. And often things like some rare diseases just don't get access to them because the market just isn't big enough. If this can help those situations, I think we have a positive, but only time will tell.
Yeah. But I love this for that. Yeah, that open science thing. And hopefully it can speed up drug discovery. And I didn't realize that it's been so long since a new antibiotic. And, that whole ASMR, like antibiotic resistance, just freaks me out. Like the idea of living in a world where antibiotics don't work anymore. So yes, more research, please.
It is a scary world where we think about how antibiotics changed medicine back in the 1940s, 1950s, when our generation may be the ones who lose that advantage. So.
Yeah, let's hope not. All right, George, now we're going to wrap with another good news story out of Australia. You've talked before on the pod about the robot called Abby, which has been built to work as a friendly companion in aged care and children's hospitals. Well, the company behind Abby, Melbourne-based Andromeda, has just raised $23 million in a Series A round at a valuation of $100 million. George, there's so much to love about this story. The founder, Grace Brown, she's only 25. She's a mechatronics engineering graduate, and she and Abby have convinced Australian and Silicon Valley investors to back Abby. So that's a good one, isn't it?
It's a great story. I mean, I had the pleasure of meeting Grace. She presented at the ITAC conference on the Gold Coast in 2023, and she blew the audience away. She actually got on stage with Abby, and by the end of her presentation, I had very senior executives from large aged care providers lined up I also have a photo taken with Abby and Grace. So I will share that photo of myself with Abby and Grace. And she's actually got the product into a number of large aged care providers. And at a recent conference I went to, 3 or 4 of them were waxing lyrical about how well Abby has helped their organizations. It's not a robot like the humanoid robots that we see on science fiction movies. It's a colorful, almost looks like it's built from Lego type thing. But what it does, it interacts with people and has empathy and has personality. And they claim it uses AI to do that. I don't know if I've told you the story, Louise, but when she presented at the conference, she told us about how she came around to invent Abby. And during lockdown, during pandemic, while she was studying mechatronic engineering, she got a whole bunch of bits and pieces together and built her first robots and developed Abby. And at that same time, I had 2 sons doing engineering as well, who they were sitting at home playing Fortnite and watching videos. So when I got home from that conference, I gave them a clip at the back of the ear and sort of said, this young girl started a business and look at her now, she's worth $100 million and you guys have built your Fortnite capabilities. So, so I think it's an example of what a motivated, smart person can do. And I think we really need to give her a pat on the back for that and recognize her as an amazing young inventor. Maybe even the Young Australian of the Year may be something we should think about. But it's a good example that irrespective of the fact, people tell you that female-started businesses are hard. Well, female-started businesses by a 22-year-old of Asian background during a pandemic has launched a $100 million Australian business. I mean, I think that's a great success story.
It is. And I believe she's off to Silicon Valley now and she's setting up headquarters in San Francisco as well as Victoria. So, and there's lots of jobs. So anyone out there looking for a job, there's quite a few jobs as a result of this round that they're looking for. So yeah, check out their website. But great Australian success story.
It is very exciting.
All right, well, it's time for a quick break. And when we return, we are going to be bringing you part 2 of our fascinating discussion with the Dr. Eric Topol. In the final part of our chat with Eric, we talk AI, of course, his reflections on the field of digital health since his book, The Creative Destruction of Medicine, came out 13 years ago. And Eric imparts some words of wisdom for clinicians who, like him, seek creative careers in medicine. Well, let's talk about AI now. So on AI and the future of care, AI is, of course, being talked about everywhere. So in your view, what's the most promising way that AI could really support clinicians and patients right now?
Well, the first one out of the gate is, getting the data clerk work, getting it down to, I call it keyboard liberation.
Oh, nice.
I see that as where this is headed because we're already seeing, there was just a publication from Mass General and Emory last week, 3 hours average that the clinicians are saving from not having to work at keyboards because of the notes that are synthetic from the conversation that do all the downstream functions. What labs need to be ordered, what follow-up appointments in this country, pre-authorization for insurance, nudging the patient subsequent to the visit to find out if the patient has been adopting the things that were discussed, getting the data back to the clinician. I mean, all these functions that are perfect for AI. So we're going to see that time that is connected to keyboards grow gradually, but in the next couple of years, go way down. You're not like a light switch. And it's going to depend on the health systems around the world using these tools. But that's the first one. If improving the medical diagnoses, that's a big one too, because so many diagnostic errors are occurring every day around the world, and we can do better with the help of AI, no less keeping up with the medical literature and many other facets about being able to compile a patient's full data set and even spot trends, for example, in the normal lab values. They may be normal, but they're going in the wrong direction kind of thing. So a lot of AI to go through a person's data and crystallize the important without taking hours of a person clicking through pages of information. And then, what I've talked about, the most, extraordinary thing is this forecasting, picking up high risk and getting all over it to prevent the disease from ever occurring.
Are you seeing that forecasting being used much? I mean, I know it's early days, but are you seeing it used in different practices in the States?
No, but we're going to work on that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're going to be leading that.
Right. I mean, that's our next big phase. We're going to do a prevention of Alzheimer's, as I mentioned, using all these new tools with proteomics, brain clocks, with biomarkers like p-tau217, with interventions that we know are working and some that we're going to test that are working. Well, no one's ever done a prevention of Alzheimer's trial. It's all about treating people.
Yeah.
So we're ready. And then we want to go after cancer and we want to go after cardiovascular, just the things that I outlined in super agers, because we are in a position now with the help of multimodal AI to do this. We never were before, and we talk really big. Oh, prevention. Oh, that's the way to go. Not better than treatments and cures. But we couldn't do it. We can now, and we have to just validate it. These models, these AI models for multimodal AI forecasting and prevention, they have to be developed. They have to be tested. But they will be, and that's something that we're going to devote a lot of our energy to now.
Yeah. With that Alzheimer's study, what is the lowest age limit to participate in that study?
Well, it's 50, but they have to have multiple high risk factors like ApoE4 allele, polygenic risk score that's high, family history of Alzheimer's that's bona fide. So yeah, it's not just age. It's got to be other major factors that put them at high risk.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Really look forward to continuing up with your Substack to follow that research.
That is very exciting because we've been talking for a long time about we have a sick care system, not a healthcare system.
Yeah.
And how we move to prevention. But like you said, as a clinician, the only tools we had for prevention were to tell people to stop smoking, do some exercise more, eat better, look at the very basic things, pretty much what Hippocrates told us 2,500 years ago. So now with tools that will enable us to focus preventative, I think it's a real positive. One of the big issues we've had over the last decade or so, of course, has been the adoption of the EMR. And the result of what Chris Longhurst, when he came out here a couple of years ago, talked about of EMR burnout, the fact that by using EMRs, clinicians were de-skilling or no longer enjoying the practice of medicine. The joy of medicine, as Danny Sands was talked about in one of our interviews recently, was gone. Do you think things like AI scribes will get us back to enabling clinicians to spend time being clinicians, not being data entry clerks?
I sure hope so. It's our best shot. And if we don't seize that opportunity, and we allow, the overlords to health systems that are only interested in the financial aspects, we got big trouble. So this is the best shot we have to achieve that cardinal goal.
And you think it's important that clinicians play an active role to ensure that? That's because, again, in the US, we have multiple facets of businesses running healthcare. We have the same challenge here in Australia. How do we take medicine back to its roots? A couple of weeks ago, we spoke to Danny Sands, and Danny Sands focused on that joy of medicine. The reason why many of us got into this game was because we wanted to do good, and many of us have left because we're just finding it too hard to do so.
Right. The problem is that, as I wrote in the New Yorker a few years back, is that we don't take on the activist role. We just have our head in the sand and want to just take care of our patients, and that's important. But we got to all be activists and stand up for the patients. That's what it's about and why we went into medicine in the first place, so we could care for patients. And care means having enough time to listen and to have a presence and establish trust and the old intimacy of that patient-doctor relationship, which is largely lost, especially here in the U.S. So that's the goal. We can do this, but it has to require the physician community, clinicians in general, really standing up for patients that this is the only way forward.
I remember reading that article many years ago and getting very excited. I think it's time to pull it back out again and drive that discussion here in Australia.
All right. We'll put a link to it in the show notes as well then. Finally, on AI, we're at that part of the hype cycle where there is risks and blind spots in that hype cycle around AI. I believe there's legislation sitting on certain people's desks in Washington saying that AI can prescribe medicine. And anyway, that has not happened here yet. And of course, that law has not been passed in the US, but I believe it's been drafted. So what do you see as some of these risks and blind spots when it comes to the hype around AI?
Yeah, there's such a long list. We got embedded biases in the AI models because we're mirroring our culture. We have all sorts of potential for worsening inequities, which you already have a big problem with, again, especially here in the US. We've got the flaws of making mistakes, hallucinating, confabulating. We have implementation issues, which if we don't keep an eye on these, they could do harm because it's software. And we all know how software can get a glitch or it can have an adversarial attack. We got problems with privacy security. Here in the US, there's lack of compelling evidence from the companies that are developing these models largely. And there's not transparency because some of the stuff never gets published, a lot of it. Some of it gets published and it isn't worth publishing it, or it's, proprietary and they're not going to release the critical information. So we got lots of issues here. The problem is all of them have a solution. One of the biggest ones is developing lots of compelling evidence, like what we've seen, for example, AI with mammography, which the largest randomized trial, nearly 100,000 women in Sweden. That's the kind of what we need, big commitments to doing high quality research to show the value of AI, to prove it once and for all. So that's, I hope, what we're going to see a lot more of.
Back in 2012, you wrote The Creative Destruction of Medicine. And I remember back then when I first saw the title of that book, the defensive reflex came in thinking, well, why do we want to destroy something we love so much? But after I read the book, the way you described the concept of creative destruction reminded me a bit also of Clayton Christensen's Innovative Dilemma. 13 years later, you had a very optimistic view of where digital health could take us. Has digital health met your expectations over those 13 years?
Somewhat. I had hoped for much faster. I've learned that it never is, in the time frame. So it's moving in the right direction. It took a pandemic to bring telemedicine into reality, which is amazing. We needed a pandemic. It was all ready to go years before, as I wrote about in the book. So, I'm encouraged by the progress, but it's slow-mo for reasons that we've been discussing. It needs to go faster. I don't know if it will, but I can see where we're headed. That's the thing. And it's brimming with optimism where we're going to get eventually. I just wish it would be next week rather than next decade. That's the problem. Yeah.
I did hear you speak to Joe Credo recently on Ground Talk. And I've known Joe for many, many years. And again, like I said, the telemedicine concepts aren't new. They just took a global pandemic to get through. So I think that's really exciting. Disappointing that we needed that. But it's interesting. In Australia, the health minister at the time talked about 10 years of transformation happening in 10 weeks because of the fact that the pandemic came across. So I guess we may have to thank the pandemic and coronavirus in some regards in the future.
Yeah, in some ways there was some help, but obviously it's a minimal bout of silver lining. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah. And, and of course, we all know that, and our whole field knows it wasn't 10 years of innovation that just happened overnight. It was like, no, our bureaucrats just got out of the way and let us practice medicine differently. Yeah.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So at a personal level, in your own practice as a doctor, what technology, past or present, has most changed the way that you practice medicine yourself?
Well, for my patients, I think the smartphone echo has been the biggest thing. Because I don't have to, very few, you have to refer for a real echo and share it with the patient in real time, which they don't get if they go to get to the lab for an echocardiogram. And the modern stethoscope, which again, it's not being used like it should. Every physician should be using a ultrasound, being able to plug into their smartphone and image any part of the body except the brain. Why that isn't happening, I don't know. But for me, it's been the case for a decade. The number of people I can help make a diagnosis or reassure them or share information that helps cultivate our relationship, all that sort of thing, send them the loops if they want it. So that one to me has been, in my practice, has been big. Polygenic risk scores of heart disease, that's another big one because these people come in with their calcium scores, which they never should have gotten these tests, and they have high scores, and I tell them, let's see what your polygenic risk score is. And oftentimes it's very low and they're reassured and they can become cardiac cripples from their calcium score that they never should have had in the first place. So that's another one that's had a big impact, which I rely on. But, lots of things that we've talked about.
Interesting you say that. The Littmann stethoscope around our necks has been our defining way of defining a doctor for many years. But it's interesting you say that the stethoscope is so 20th century.
Yeah.
Or neck, it would be all right. It would have the same look, but it sure would get you a lot more information. No one was more enthusiastic about listening to heart sounds, split S2 and clicks and rubs and you name it. But, that isn't it anymore. That just doesn't cut it.
Obviously, you've published a number of books, and there's been a lot of books published around the transformation of healthcare and what needs to go forward. Other than your own books, any specific books you would recommend people to read around health transformation, or any particular other gurus we should be looking to around the digital transformation of healthcare?
That's a good question. On the digital, I know Bob Wachter has a new book coming out in the months ahead, and he's very thoughtful. And so that one's probably going to be, I'm just starting to read it now, and it should be out, in the months ahead. There's probably a few more, but that's the one that comes to my mind straight away.
Yes. And of course, there's your own Substack too, which we will put a link to.
Yeah. Every week I try to put something interesting that largely is not covered by media, but I found fascinating, and it's oftentimes in this space.
I have to admit, I do love your ground truths, but your Machine and the Medicine podcast with Abraham Verghese was one of my favorites going back a few years ago.
Oh, thank you.
But the two of you had a great banter between the two of you. I really enjoyed those podcasts.
I did too. And it was only Medscape. They were just financially driven and it wasn't making enough money from their ads. So they cut it. And
That's a shame.
I know. And Abraham and I are very close and we love doing it. And
it's always, I used to love that Abraham Verghese was a great physician and also wrote great novels.
He's amazing. He wrote both nonfiction and fiction, and he's quite a force.
Fantastic. All right. Well, final question. There's a fabulous community here in Australia called Creative Careers in Medicine, and it's founded and led by a GP, Dr. Amandeep Hansra. As a successful doctor who continues to have a creative career, what advice do you have for other clinicians who desire to use their medical training in creative ways?
Well, that's what's great about our training is it's pluripotent. I mean, you can do so many different things. For me, it's been, I get bored easily, so you got to move on to the next topic and to anticipate where the field is. But, there's so many other things you can do with it. That's what's great about medicine. Its reach is extraordinary. It's so broad. And people go into, so many other things part-time as they're continuing their practice. So I think it's good. It's enriching. It's certainly, for me, been a way to always feel stimulated, invigorated, that, moving on to the next new thing. So, yeah, I couldn't encourage that more. I do think there's going to be less burnout, which will reduce the desperate need for that. We'll always want to see people taking on some new dimensions in their medical career.
Oh, thank you. And it's such an inspiration for someone who's been so successful at having that creative career and continuing to have that creative career for other doctors to know that it is possible, whatever your passions might be. It might not be digital health. I met a doctor on the weekend. His passion is poetry. And it's like, yes, you can do that too. I met a comedian.
Yeah, I've met physicians that do all, they go comedy shows, they do like poetry, you name it. I've seen physicians do it. And these are very talented people. I mean, clinicians are exceptional people that have a lot to offer. Whatever you enjoy, it's a good thing to consider pursuing.
Yeah, and you can apply your medicine skills to it. Someone else I met on the weekend at Creative Careers in Medicine conference is a doctor, a hip-hop artist as well. And in his keynote, he actually played a clip that he has self-produced, and it's hip-hop, and it's about addiction. A part of the song, he plays the caring friend or family member that's trying to help the person with addiction. And then in other parts of the song, he plays the part of the person who is addicted. And, really applying and using that as like a public health service announcement, public health message. So using those creative skills that he has.
That's great. Love it.
Oh, well, it's just been, we could have talked to you for hours and hours, but we should let George get to bed because I think it's like 2 a.m. for him in Greece.
2:30 in the morning, but I told Louise that I was willing to stay up to have this discussion. So it's been a real pleasure and an honor speaking to you, Dr. Topol. And like I said, I've got all your books all the way back to your cardiology textbooks. So if I ever get a chance to meet you, I'll bring a pen along and get you to sign some for me.
Kind of you, and I hope you get some rest. I'm working on a similar thing. I just got back from a trip at 3 a.m, our time. So I know what it feels like. Not good. Hopefully you'll get some good rest and really enjoyed talking with you both.
Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we hope to have you down in Australia at some time in the future.
Yeah, it'll be fun to visit again. I would always enjoy the chance to go down under. It's phenomenal.
Brilliant. So, George, I was wondering, did you notice throughout our interview, you referred to him Dr. Topol, which I've not heard you do. And, all the doctors I know, it's always a first name basis. And the whole time I was thinking, oh no, George is saying Dr. Topol, should I do the same? So hopefully Eric isn't offended at my informality.
I think it just respects, like I said, I've pointed out that I've been an Eric Topol fanboy for many, many years. And the fact that I got up at 1:30 in the morning whilst in Athens to make sure I joined that interview says it all. I think there were some really great insights in that discussion for both clinicians and for consumers. I said I recommended people listen to his podcast. His previous podcast, and I think I commented on it during our interview, which he did with Professor Abraham Verghese from Stanford, was fascinating because Abraham Verghese, he's written a number of novels. He's a consummate communicator who is all about human touch and empathy. And Eric Topol was the digital health maestro. And the two of them just worked so closely together on discussing how in real medicine you need to meld empathy and social sciences and clinical sciences and data sciences. That was an amazing discussion. It's a shame that one's finished, but Ground Truth is really worth listening to.
Yeah, I'll put a link to the show notes. All right, George, do you have any recommendations for our listeners this week?
I've been reading a book called The AI Valley by Gary Rivlin, which is an interesting insight into the war for AI dominance in Silicon Valley. And it provides us some scary challenges in that this has now become such a big business that I think to some degree we may have forgotten why we do these sort of things. But we don't do them just to grow the size of the business, but to provide public benefit. So it's a little scary reading that. And I've been reading some other things around the battle around AI. And I think we need to understand that the consequences of having AI controlled by 3 or 4 large companies who basically are run by people with very strong egos has some challenges for us going forward.
Yes, you're 100% right. All right, well, send me a link to that and I'll put that one in the show notes as well.
What do you recommend this weekend?
I can recommend the book I'm reading, but it's part of a series. So J.K. Rowling writes crime novels. Well, it's actually about a detective. And I think the 7th one just came out. So I've just started reading that. So it's not often I sit down with a novel. I'm usually, reading more academic things and being a bit boring. But yeah, that is a good book. But there actually were a couple of free courses that have come across my radar in the last week, which I thought Pulse Poddies may be interested in. So one is a completely free course on AI in healthcare. It's online, it's self-paced, there's about 10 hours of content, and that's from the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and it's through their Graduate School of Healthcare Management. So the fact that they've made that free, I'm like, well, that's awesome. And another one which is also free, but this one has a bit more structure to it, it's the Patients Insights Masterclass, the Future of Patient Insights. And it's for anyone who is involved in working with patients from an inpatient experience, from an engagement and data insights. So if you work with patients and you're using maybe outdated methods, data that isn't designed for AI, that type of stuff, then there's a 10-week masterclass on that is also free. So I will put a link to that. That's by a private company, I believe, called Savvy Cooperative. So I will put a link to that in the show notes.
You never cease to amaze me, Louise, how you find time to do all these things. I mean, how many hours sleep do you get a day?
Oh, not enough. That's just not good. Don't do as I do. Yes. Oh, the sleep researchers would not be happy with me. But anyway, yes, hopefully there's a couple of courses there that some of you may be interested in, as well as, yes, have a look at Andromeda's website because they're looking for roles.
Excellent. So on our next episode of Pulse, we have an interview with Dr. Charlotte Blees and her new book, Dr. Bot. Having read the book, it is an amazing insight by someone who's not a clinician. She's actually a philosopher, and she's done some amazing work around philosophies associated with AI in healthcare. So I highly recommend you listen to it.
Yes, absolutely. I love the interview with Charlotte. And the subtitle of her book is Why Doctors Can Fail Us and How AI Could Save Lives. So yes, essential reading. And we look forward to hearing your feedback on the episode with Charlotte coming up next on Pulse. All right. Well, George, I will see you back in the studio in a couple of weeks. And until then, if you could please read us out.
Sure. And just so everyone, when you listen to our future episodes, please feedback on what you think about the new change in format as we go forward. Thank you all for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse IT News. Pulse is produced by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions. Big thanks to everyone for listening. Make sure you subscribe, follow, and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, you can visit pulseit.news to sign up for the e-newsletter and explore Pulse IT's massive digital archive. Send any feedback or topic suggestions to pulsepod@pulseit.news. We'd love to hear what's on your mind. Thanks, everyone. All the best.
Thanks, George.